The sun was slowly rising over the quiet military base, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The air was still cool, and the sound of boots on gravel could be heard as soldiers began their morning routines. Among them was Sergeant Mark, a man with a calm but strong presence. He was well respected, not because he spoke loudly, but because he led with quiet strength. By his side was his loyal partner, a strong German shepherd named Rex. Rex was not just any dog. He had trained for years to serve with the canine unit. He could smell danger before it came, find people in trouble, and follow silent hand signals from his handler. But what made him truly special was his bond with Mark. Wherever Mark went, Rex followed. When Mark walked through the base, Rex stayed close to his leg, watching every movement around them. When Mark sat down, Rex would lie at his feet like a silent guardian. They understood each other without speaking a single word. Other soldiers often said that Rex seemed to read Mark's mind. If Mark turned his head, Rex would already be looking in that direction. If Mark reached for his gear, Rex would stand alert, ready for action. It wasn't just training, it was trust. Over time, they had become family. Mark had joined the army young, carrying a sense of duty and love for his country. But through the long missions and sleepless nights, it was Rex who gave him strength. The two had been through difficult operations together. They had walked in dark, silent fields where anything could happen. They had faced storms, long nights, and dangerous paths. But no matter what came their way, they always returned together. On this morning, Mark woke earlier than usual. He sat on the edge of his bunk, lacing his boots slowly. Rex lifted his head, his ears perking up the moment he saw his partner getting ready. The dog wagged his tail slightly, a quiet sign that he was ready to. Mark smiled and patted Rex on the head. "Another day, buddy," Mark said softly. Rex responded with a quiet huff, as if he understood every word. When they stepped outside, the cool breeze hit their faces. Mark wore his uniform and carried his gear neatly, while Rex wore his black canine vest with pride. The patch on the side read Canine Unit. It wasn't just a uniform. It was a symbol of trust, discipline, and courage. Mark and Rex began their usual routine. They walked around the training grounds, checking areas and greeting other soldiers. Many of the younger soldiers looked at Rex with a mix of respect and amazement. They had seen dogs before, but Rex was different. His sharp eyes and calm focus made everyone feel safe around him. There was a special training area at the back of the base where Mark and Rex spent most of their mornings. It was quiet, surrounded by short fences and patches of dirt and grass. Here, they practiced signals, scent detection, and emergency drills. Mark threw a small rubber object far across the field. "Search," he commanded. Rex ran like the wind, nose to the ground, focused only on the mission. He didn't get distracted. When he found the object, he returned with proud eyes, holding it tightly in his mouth. Mark crouched down and patted his head. "Good boy," Mark whispered. Moments like these were ordinary to others, but precious to them. It was their time a bond strengthened every single day. Later in the morning, after training, Mark sat on a small wooden bench near the fence. He took out his water bottle and watched Rex lie down beside him, resting his head on Mark's boot. The quiet moment said more than words ever could. Rex was more than a dog. He was Mark's partner, his best friend, and his silent protector. A few other soldiers joined them. They often admired how close the two were. One of them, a young soldier named Lewis, smiled and said, "You two are like one person." Right. Mark laughed softly and nodded. "He's the better half of this team." Rex lifted his head as if he knew he was being praised. His tail wagged slightly again, and everyone around smiled. As the day went on, an unexpected call came through the radio. It was short and clear. A team was needed for a special operation. Mark was on the list. He quickly stood up, and Rex immediately followed, tail still but ears alert. The mission sounded like a simple routine, an area check outside the base. Mark had done many like it before, but something about Rex's reaction made the moment different. As they moved toward the trucks, Rex pressed closer to Mark's leg than usual, almost as if he could feel something coming. Mark placed a steady hand on Rex's back. "We got this," he whispered again. Rex gave a small bark in response, short, confident, and loyal. Before leaving, a few of the soldiers waved them off. Everyone knew that when Mark and Rex went out, they always came back. Their teamwork had saved many lives in the past. There was a sense of trust that followed them like a warm shadow. Inside the vehicle, as they drove through dusty roads, Mark looked at Rex sitting beside him. The dog's eyes were fixed forward, ears turning with every sound. Even in silence, Rex was working alert, focused, and ready. Mark felt a deep sense of comfort. In dangerous missions, trust was everything. And with Rex beside him, he never felt alone. The sound of the engine filled the truck. Mark leaned back, remembering the first time they met. Rex had been younger then, full of energy and wild spirit. Mark had spent hours earning his trust, training with patience, and showing kindness. At first, Rex had been unsure, like a soldier who didn't know who to follow. But slowly, through calm words and steady hands, they had become partners. That memory made Mark smile. He reached down and gave Rex a gentle pat. Rex didn't turn his head, but his tail moved once. That was his way of saying, "I'm here." The open field stretched ahead, and the mission had officially started. No one could have guessed how the day would end. But one thing was certain: whatever happened, Rex would not let anything happen to his partner. Mark adjusted his helmet, took a deep breath, and looked at the horizon. Rex sat tall beside him, ready to face anything. In that silent moment, it wasn't just a soldier and his dog. It was two souls connected by loyalty, trust, and unspoken love. This was not just another mission. This was the beginning of a story that would be remembered by everyone on the base. The day when a German Shepherd did something that no one thought was possible. But for Mark, Rex had always been more than a dog. He was family. As the vehicle moved farther from the base, a quiet feeling of fate hung in the air. Neither man nor dog could see the storm ahead. But Rex, with his sharp instincts, was already sensing that something was different. He pressed his body closer to Mark's leg, steady, loyal, and ready for whatever lay ahead. And Mark, trusting that bond with his life, didn't need to say a word. Their hearts already understood each other. That bond, built over years of loyalty and shared danger, was about to be tested like never before. But neither of them knew that yet. For now, it was just a soldier and his loyal German Shepherd, heading into the unknown together. The sun had climbed higher in the sky as the military convoy moved slowly down the dusty road. The air was still, and the only sounds were the steady hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on dry earth. Sergeant Mark sat inside the vehicle, looking out the window. Rex was beside him on the floor, alert, watching everything. His ears twitched at the slightest sound, and his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings like a silent guard. The mission had sounded simple when they left the base. They were supposed to check a quiet area where radio signals had been weak the last few days. It was nothing unusual, just routine work. Mark had been on similar missions many times, but something about the quietness today felt different. It wasn't the normal kind of calm. It was heavy, almost too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Mark gently touched Rex's head. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But Rex didn't relax. He sat upright, his body tense. His nose twitched as if he could smell something far away. Mark trusted Rex more than anyone on the team. If Rex felt something was wrong, then it probably was. The convoy stopped near an old dirt path. The soldiers stepped out, their boots pressing into the dry ground. The wind was light, carrying the smell of dust and dry grass. Mark and Rex were in the front unit. They moved carefully, side by side, their steps steady and quiet. Rex's training made him move like a shadow, silent, quick, and alert. Mark scanned the area with his eyes while Rex used his powerful nose to detect anything unusual. The two worked together without speaking a word. Other soldiers followed behind. Trusting the pair's instincts, they reached a small, open area with abandoned equipment scattered around. An old, broken vehicle stood on one side, half covered in dust. A few empty crates lay near it. The air felt heavy. Mark gave Rex a hand signal, and Rex slowly sniffed the ground. His tail stiffened. His ears went up. He had found something. Mark crouched down, his hand resting on Rex's vest. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Rex didn't bark. He never barked during search mode, but he gave a low growl deep in his chest. It was his way of warning Mark that something was close. The team moved carefully, checking every corner. And then, in less than a second, the world changed. A sudden loud explosion tore through the silence. The ground shook violently beneath their feet. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning everything gray. Mark felt himself being thrown backward with a hard force. His ears rang, and everything became a blur. The sound of the blast was so powerful, it made the world go silent for a moment. When Mark opened his eyes, he was lying on the ground. His helmet was cracked, and there was a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to breathe, but each breath felt heavy and hot. His vision was blurry, and his arms felt weak. He could taste dust in his mouth. He heard faint shouting, but it sounded far away, like echoes underwater. Then, through the thick smoke, a shape appeared. It was Rex. Rex had been pushed back by the explosion, but had quickly recovered. His ears were flat, his tail stiff, and his eyes locked on Mark. The dog ran straight to him, leaping over broken crates and debris without hesitation. His training told him to stay calm during danger, but this was more than training. This was his partner. Rex reached Mark's side and pressed his nose against Mark's shoulder, letting out a worried whine. Mark tried to lift his hand, but it barely moved. His breathing was getting worse. He could feel the warmth spreading across his uniform. He was bleeding. The radio crackled, but the connection was weak. The other soldiers were scattered, some taking cover, some trying to get back on their feet. Mark was alone with Rex in the smoke. His head felt heavy, and his heartbeat was slowing. In his blurry vision, all he could see was Rex's worried eyes staring into his. Rex barked loud, sharp, desperate. It wasn't just a bark. It was a call for help. But no one answered immediately. The explosion had damaged the communication lines. The dog lowered his head and nudged Mark's chest with his nose again, as if telling him, "Stay with me." But Mark could barely respond. His hand slowly moved toward Rex's vest. His fingers brushed against the fabric. "Rex," he whispered weakly. His voice cracked. Rex understood in his own way. He didn't move from Mark's side. He stood over his partner, facing the smoke, ears alert, growling softly at the unknown. The dust swirled around them like a storm, but Rex didn't blink. His world had one focus: protect Mark. Minutes felt like hours. The situation around was still dangerous. But Rex wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about saving his human. He pressed closer, his warm body against Mark's arm. Grounding him to reality, Mark tried to keep his eyes open, but darkness kept pulling him down. He could hear Rex's breathing, fast and determined. He could feel the dog's fur against his skin. That was the only thing keeping him from slipping away completely far away. A few soldiers began to regroup. They couldn't see through the thick smoke, but they could hear a dog barking over and over again. It was Rex. His barks were strong and sharp, echoing through the smoke like a signal flare. One of the soldiers shouted, "Follow the K9! Follow Rex's bark." Rex's voice was guiding them back, but the soldiers were still some distance away. Mark was losing blood fast. His breathing became shallow. He closed his eyes for a moment, and everything went quiet. He thought of his family, of home, of the sun rising over the base. But then he felt a wet nose press against his cheek. Rex was licking his face gently, refusing to let him drift away. He gave another sharp bark right next to his ear, loud enough to pull Mark back. Mark forced his eyes open again. All he saw was Rex's face, loyal, determined. And full of something stronger than fear, the dog wasn't giving up. Rex moved quickly, circling around Mark, checking the area for more danger. Then returning to his side. He wasn't just trained to attack or sniff. He was trained to save lives. But this was more than a task. This was his partner. Mark's breathing grew slower, and he whispered, "Don't leave me." His voice was faint. Rex placed his body against Mark's chest, lying partially on him to keep him warm and steady. His ears were pointed forward, listening for the team. But if no one came, Rex was ready to act on his own. The first soldier finally appeared through the smoke, coughing and waving his hand to clear the air. "There, Rex has him," he shouted. But even before they reached, Rex had already made a decision. He gently grabbed the strap of Mark's vest with his teeth and began to pull, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to drag him toward a safer spot. Step by step, inch by inch, the dog pulled with all his strength. His paws dug into the dirt, his body tense, his breath fast. Mark could feel himself moving, though weakly. His world was spinning, but he knew Rex was not leaving him behind. Finally, more soldiers arrived, guided by Rex's desperate barking. They rushed to help, lifting Mark onto a stretcher. Rex didn't let go of the strap until he was sure Mark was secured. Even then, he stayed right beside him, panting hard but refusing to step away, as the medic started treating Mark. Rex sat at his side, watching every movement, his ears still alert, ready to fight for him if needed. The mission that started as routine had turned into a nightmare. But in that nightmare, Rex had become Mark's only light, the loyal friend, who refused to let him fade away. The helicopter was already being called in. The team worked fast, but no one missed the sight that would stay in their memories forever. A German shepherd sitting proudly, but anxiously, next to his injured partner. His eyes locked on him, his body refusing to move even an inch. That was the moment everyone on the team realized something powerful. This was not just a dog. This was a hero in a canine vest, fighting for his partner's life in the middle of chaos. And the story of this moment was only just beginning. The sound of the helicopter blades grew louder in the distance. The soldiers on the ground cleared a small space for the landing. Dust swirled through the air, mixing with the gray smoke that still hung over the area like a heavy blanket. The team moved fast, but in the middle of it all, Rex stayed close to Sergeant Mark. His paws were planted firmly beside the stretcher. His sharp eyes followed every hand that touched Mark, and his ears picked up every sound around them. Mark's breathing was uneven. His uniform was covered with dust and blood, and his face had turned pale. His hand lay limp on the side of the stretcher. Rex gently pressed his nose against Mark's fingers as if trying to remind him he wasn't alone, even though the world around them was loud and rushed. The connection between the man and his dog was silent, strong, and real. The medics worked quickly. "We need to get him on the chopper right away," one of them shouted. Two soldiers lifted the stretcher carefully. Rex tried to climb up with them, but one of the medics held out a hand. "Easy, boy. We'll bring him up." Rex didn't like being separated from Mark. His body stiffened, and a low whine escaped from his throat. He tried to follow again, his paws scratching against the metal ramp of the helicopter. Finally, the medic gave a small nod, and they let Rex jump in beside the stretcher. He settled down close to Mark's arm, pressing his body against him as the helicopter doors closed. The helicopter lifted off, and the ground below grew smaller. Inside, the medic shouted numbers to another soldier, but Mark couldn't hear anything. His eyelids were heavy, and his breathing grew slower with each passing minute. The soft hum of the helicopter was mixed with the steady beeping of medical equipment. Rex lay with his head on Mark's chest, listening to the faint heartbeat. He didn't understand the medical numbers or the words the medics were saying, but he understood something deeper. His human was slipping away. His tail didn't wag, his ears didn't move. He stayed still, guarding Mark's life like it was his own. Mark's mind was drifting between wakefulness and darkness. In one moment, he was aware of the loud rotor blades. In the next, everything went quiet. Memories began to flash in his head like pieces of an old film. He remembered his first day with Rex, the nervous young dog with bright, sharp eyes. He remembered training together, running across fields, and learning to trust each other. He remembered Rex's first mission, when the dog had found a lost child faster than anyone expected. But those warm memories faded into the heavy weight on his chest. His breathing hurt. His body wanted to give up. The medic leaned over and shouted, "Stay with us, Sergeant." But Mark barely heard it, and then he felt something warm, a wet nose pressing against his hand. Rex, even in his blurred vision, could see those eyes. the same loyal eyes that had followed him through every mission. Every long night, every step of this journey, Rex's nose pushed against his palm again, firmer this time. His ears were low, and his soft whines filled the small helicopter cabin. It was as if he was begging Mark not to leave. The medic glanced at Rex, and then at Mark. "He's responding to the dog," the medic said loudly. "Keep him close." The pilot called out through the radio. "ETA 5 minutes." But 5 minutes felt like forever. Mark's head tilted to the side. His eyes were closing. His heartbeat was slowing. That was when Rex did something no one expected. He placed both his front paws gently on the edge of the stretcher and leaned closer to Mark's face. He pressed his warm nose to Mark's cheek and gave him a soft lick, just like he used to do after every mission. It wasn't just a touch. It was a memory, a promise. Rex began to bark, short and sharp. It echoed inside the helicopter. The sound was not out of panic. It was a strong, steady bark, as if Rex was calling Mark back. The medic, surprised, saw Mark's eyelids flicker slightly. "Keep talking to him." The medic shouted. Rex didn't have words, but he had something stronger, his presence. He let out soft, repeated barks, mixed with small whines, refusing to be silent. His tail lay flat, but his eyes stayed locked on Mark's, inside Mark's fading mind. That sound cut through the darkness like a light. He remembered every time he had called out Rex, and the dog came running. Now it was Rex calling him. Something deep inside, Mark responded. His hand moved just a little. He moved. A soldier yelled. "Good boy, Rex," the medic whispered. Realizing the dog was doing something even they couldn't, Rex pressed his head against Mark's arm again, letting out a steady, low sound. His heart beat fast, but he didn't give up. He stayed close, keeping Mark anchored to the world. When the helicopter landed near the military hospital, Rex was the first to stand up. He didn't wait for instructions. As soon as the doors opened, he followed the stretcher down the ramp, never leaving Mark's side. Medics rushed to take Mark inside. A nurse tried to gently hold Rex back, but the dog refused to move. "This dog's not going anywhere," one of the medics said, recognizing the bond. "Let him stay." Mark was taken into the emergency room. Doctors surrounded him. Machines beeped. Nurses spoke quickly. But Rex stayed just outside the room, his eyes fixed on the swinging doors. He sat perfectly still, tail flat on the ground, ears forward. His whole world was behind those doors. Minutes turned into an hour. Every second felt like a year to Rex. He didn't bark now. He waited. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. Occasionally someone passed by and patted his head. But Rex didn't move. He remembered the training where he had been taught to stay calm during chaos. But this was harder than any mission. This was about his human. Behind the doors, Mark's body fought hard. Doctors worked quickly, stopping the bleeding, stabilizing his breathing, and attaching tubes and wires. The sound of machines filled the room. Outside, Rex slowly lay down on the floor, his head between his paws, his eyes still fixed on the door. Soldiers from the base had arrived. They stood quietly, watching the loyal dog. Some of them whispered, "He hasn't moved since they took the sergeant in." Another soldier nodded softly. "He won't. That's his partner." Rex's ears twitched when he heard Mark's name from inside. His eyes sharpened and his head lifted. He didn't understand human language completely, but he recognized the sound of his partner's name. It made him focus even more. Hours passed. The hospital lights turned brighter, then softer. Still, Rex didn't give up. He waited like a soldier on duty. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor stepped out. The soldiers around held their breath. Rex stood up quickly, his tail still low, but his eyes fixed on the doctor. "He's alive," the doctor said with a tired but warm smile. "He's weak, but he's stable." The soldiers exhaled in relief. Rex let out a single, quiet bark, almost like a soft thank you. His tail moved once, slowly. The doctor looked at Rex. "This dog stayed here the whole time?" "Yes," one of the soldiers replied. "He hasn't moved an inch." The doctor nodded. "Then I think you should see him." Inside the recovery room, Mark lay on a bed with wires and machines around him. His face was still pale, but there was color returning slowly. Rex was brought inside quietly. The moment the dog saw Mark, he gently climbed near the bed, resting his chin on the side of the mattress. His ears were still forward, his eyes warm and steady. Mark's eyes opened slowly. At first, everything was blurry. Then he saw a familiar shape, that brown and black fur, those loyal eyes. Rex. He whispered weakly. The dog responded instantly, lifting his head and letting out a soft bark, followed by a gentle wag of his tail. Rex pressed his nose against Mark's hand, careful and gentle. Mark weakly moved his fingers and managed to touch the dog's fur. Tears filled some soldiers' eyes as they watched from the hallway. It wasn't just a soldier and his dog. It was a bond stronger than words. Rex didn't understand everything that had happened. But he understood one thing clearly. His partner was alive. He hadn't failed. The night grew quiet. Machines kept their steady rhythm. And Rex stayed beside Mark's bed, his head resting close, his eyes half closed but always alert. The hard part wasn't over yet, but Rex had already done something extraordinary. He had refused to let go, and that loyalty, quiet, strong, and pure, had given Sergeant Mark a second chance at life. The night at the military hospital was silent, except for the soft sounds of medical machines beeping in a slow rhythm. The hallway lights were dim, and the air carried the smell of clean floors and quiet waiting. Inside the recovery room, Sergeant Mark lay in bed with a bandage wrapped around his chest and wires connected to his body. The doctors had done everything they could. Now his healing would depend on time and strength. Right next to his bed, curled up like a guardian, was Rex. The German Shepherd hadn't left his side since the moment Mark was brought in. He lay, close to the floor, his head resting gently near Mark's hand. His ears twitched with every little sound, but his eyes stayed fixed on his partner. It didn't matter how late it got or how long he had to wait. He was there for Mark. The nurses who walked past often slowed down to look at the pair. Some whispered softly to each other, amazed at how still and loyal the dog was. One nurse smiled and said quietly to another, "It's like he knows he saved him." Mark was still weak. Every breath he took was slow and careful, but his body was fighting to heal. Sometimes he opened his eyes for a few seconds, and the first thing he saw was Rex. And every time he saw those familiar brown eyes, something inside him grew a little stronger. Early the next morning, a gentle ray of sunlight entered through the small hospital window. The warm light fell across Rex's fur, making it shine softly. He lifted his head and let out a quiet breath. A nurse entered with soft steps, carrying a tray. She placed it on the table and whispered kindly to Rex, "Good morning, brave boy." Rex tilted his head, his ears perking up for a second, but he didn't move away from Mark. The nurse checked Mark's vitals. The numbers were improving slowly. "You're doing well, Sergeant," she said softly, even though she knew he might not fully hear her. She then turned to Rex and added with a smile, "And so are you."
Oh.
The day visitors came by, fellow soldiers from the base, the commander, and a few close friends. Each one of them paused when they saw Rex sitting proudly near the bed. Some patted his head, others simply smiled. It wasn't just Mark who was loved here. Rex had become a hero too. Lewis, the young soldier who often trained with Mark, entered quietly with a tired smile. He knelt down and gently scratched behind Rex's ear. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You saved him." Rex gave a small huff, like he understood. He didn't wag his tail wildly, just a single calm wag, steady and sure. Mark's condition slowly improved over the next few days. The pain was still there, but he was awake more often. His voice was weak, but his words were soft and filled with gratitude. One afternoon, as he opened his eyes and saw Rex lying beside him, he whispered, "You never left, did you?" Rex lifted his head, pressing his nose gently against Mark's arm. It was his quiet way of saying, "I never will." The doctors were amazed at how fast Mark's spirit was recovering. One of them said to the team, "His physical injuries are serious, but the bond with his dog is helping him heal faster than expected. It's remarkable." Every time Mark felt pain or fear, Rex's presence calmed him down. Just knowing his loyal partner was there gave him strength. Even during the darkest hours of the night, when Mark would wake up from pain, Rex was already watching, his ears alert and his eyes soft. Soon, word about what Rex had done began to spread across the base and beyond. Soldiers spoke of the dog who dragged his wounded handler, barked for help, and refused to leave his side. People who didn't even know Mark or Rex felt touched by the story. The base commander visited one afternoon. A tall man with a serious face stood silently by the bed for a few seconds before kneeling down in front of Rex. "You saved one of my best men," he said in a calm, deep voice. He patted Rex gently on the head. "You're a hero too." Rex didn't understand the words fully, but he felt the kindness behind them. He lowered his head slightly, as if accepting the praise with quiet pride. Outside the hospital, soldiers were already planning a small ceremony to honor Rex for his brave actions. But inside the room, Rex didn't care about medals or ceremonies. His only mission was clear: stay with Mark until he was strong again. As the days passed, Mark began to sit up slowly with help. The pain was still sharp, but he pushed through it. Rex followed every movement carefully, making sure his partner was okay. When Mark sat up for the first time, Rex wagged his tail a little faster, letting out a soft sound that made everyone in the room smile. "Look at him," Lewis said with a grin. "He's more proud of you than we are." Mark reached out and placed his hand on Rex's head. "I'm proud of him too," he said softly. His voice was still weak, but his heart was full. One evening, Mark was allowed to go outside for a short walk in the hospital courtyard. He wore a hospital robe, and there was still a bandage on his chest, but he was determined to breathe fresh air again. Rex walked right beside him, step for step, just like they did on every mission. The courtyard was quiet with a few trees and benches. Mark sat on a bench, looking up at the sky that was slowly turning golden with the sunset. Rex lay down at his feet, resting his head on his boot the same way he always did before a mission. The moment felt familiar and comforting. Mark reached down and scratched Rex gently behind the ear. "You saved my life, buddy," he whispered. "I wouldn't be here without you." Rex lifted his head and pressed his face against Mark's hand again. His tail wagged softly. For the first time since the incident, Mark let out a warm, deep breath that didn't hurt as much as before. He felt a sense of peace. Meanwhile, at the base, preparations were being made for their return. News had spread widely about the K9 hero who didn't give up. Soldiers were talking about how Rex had shown what true loyalty looked like. Some even called him the guardian dog. A few days later, Mark was finally discharged from the hospital. He still needed to rest, but he was strong enough to walk with care. When he stepped outside the hospital doors, Rex walked proudly by his side, wearing his K9 vest once again. They were greeted by a small group of soldiers holding a flag and clapping softly. Among them was the commander, who stepped forward and saluted Mark. Then he bent down and placed a special medal on Rex's collar. "This is for bravery," he said, "for loyalty, and for saving a life." Everyone clapped, but Rex didn't understand the meaning of a medal. What he did understand was the familiar sound of Mark's voice beside him. "Good boy," Mark whispered. Rex's tail wagged with quiet joy. He wasn't looking for rewards. He just wanted his partner safe. Later that night, Mark returned to his quarters at the base. It felt different now, quieter, more precious. He lay on his bed, tired but thankful. Rex curled up at the foot of the bed like always. As Mark closed his eyes, he thought about that terrible day, the explosion, the pain, the helicopter ride. But what stood out the most wasn't the fear. It was Rex's face, his determined eyes, and the sound of his barks pulling him back to life. He whispered softly into the dark room, "You're more than just a dog, Rex. You're family." Rex lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name, then lay back down, content and calm. Outside, the stars shone quietly above the base. Inside, a soldier slept with his loyal partner watching over him. The bond they shared had already been strong before that day, but now it was unbreakable. It wasn't just a story about survival. It was a story about trust, courage, love that needed no words. Rex had performed a miracle when it mattered most, but to him, it wasn't a miracle. It was simply what he was always meant to do: protect the one he loved. And from that day on, everyone who saw the two of them walking side by side knew they were more than a team. They were a family that had walked through the storm together and returned stronger than ever. The sun was shining brightly on the day Sergeant Mark returned to the military base. The wind carried the familiar scent of dust and earth, the sound of boots on gravel, the soft hum of soldiers moving about their duties. Everything looked the same: the tall fence, the training grounds, the vehicles lined up but for Mark. Everything felt different now. Just a few weeks earlier, he had left this place on what was supposed to be a simple mission. He had almost never made it back. But now, he stood at the main gate, a little slower, still healing, yet stronger in spirit. And right beside him, walking proudly with his head high, was Rex, his loyal canine partner, the dog who had refused to let him die. Mark took a deep breath. The warm air filled his lungs, and though his chest still ached, the feeling of being home wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. Rex walked close to his leg, matching his steps perfectly as always. His ears were alert and his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, not because there was danger, but because that was who he was, a protector. As they entered the base, soldiers turned their heads. Some stopped what they were doing to watch them. A wave of respect followed them. Mark was known as a good soldier, but Rex was now known as the dog who performed a miracle. Lewis, the young soldier who had always admired their bond, came running toward them with a wide grin. "Welcome home, Sergeant," he said. Then he bent down to Rex's level and added warmly, "And welcome home, hero." Rex tilted his head and wagged his tail once, a calm and proud movement. He wasn't the type of dog to jump or bark loudly in joy. His way was quieter, steady, and loyal. Mark gave Lewis a small nod. "Feels good to be back," he said softly. His voice still carried the weight of everything that had happened. But it was steadier now. In the following days, Mark slowly returned to his routine. He couldn't run or train like before yet, but he walked the base every morning with Rex. The soldiers would wave at them. Sometimes someone would stop to pet Rex and thank him. They all knew that if it wasn't for Rex, their friend might not be standing there today. At the training grounds, Mark watched other handlers work with their dogs. Young German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois ran through obstacle courses, learned to follow commands, and practice their signals. Watching them reminded him of the early days with Rex. He remembered how uncertain. Rex had been at first a strong dog, with a wild spirit that took time and patience to shape into the perfect partner. He looked down at Rex, who was sitting calmly beside him, watching the other dogs too. "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" Mark whispered. Rex looked up at him with those warm brown eyes, and for a moment, it felt like the dog understood every single word. Weeks passed, and Mark's strength slowly returned. The doctors were amazed at how quickly his body was healing. They said a strong mind and heart could do wonders for recovery and for Mark. Rex had been the reason his heart never gave up. The base commander decided to hold a small ceremony. It wasn't just a formality. It was a moment to honor something special. Word spread fast around the base. Soldiers, medics, and even officers who had heard about the incident came to the main training field. On the day of the ceremony, the sky was clear and bright. Rows of soldiers stood neatly, their boots lined up in perfect order. Mark wore his uniform again for the first time since the incident. He still moved carefully, but there was pride in his step. Rex walked beside him wearing his black canine vest, the same one he had worn that day on the field, now cleaned and shining. The commander stood at the front with a microphone in hand. "Today," he began, "we gather to honor courage and loyalty, not just from one of our soldiers, but from one of our most trusted guardians, a canine who reminded us all what true partnership looks like." The crowd was silent, listening closely. When Sergeant Mark was injured in the line of duty, the commander continued. It was Rex who acted without hesitation. It was Rex who pulled him toward safety. It was Rex who guided help to him. And it was Rex who never left his side. Mark stood quietly looking down at Rex. His throat tightened as he remembered that terrifying day. But this time The memory didn't bring pain, it brought gratitude. The commander stepped forward with a small, shining medal attached to a ribbon. It was engraved with the words for bravery. He knelt in front of Rex and carefully placed it on his collar. The crowd clapped, not loudly or wildly, but in a steady, respectful rhythm that echoed through the field. Rex didn't understand the meaning of medals or ceremonies, but he understood the warmth in the air, the gentle pats on his head, and the proud, steady heartbeat of the man beside him. He wagged his tail softly, his eyes calm and bright. Mark knelt beside him and whispered, "You did good, buddy. You did real good." After the ceremony, people came up to them, one by one, to thank them. Some shared stories about their own canine partners. Others simply patted Rex and smiled. In every pair of eyes, there was respect, not just for the dog, but for the bond between them. Later that evening, when the base quieted down and the sun began to set, Mark and Rex walked together to their favorite spot behind the training field. It was a small hill overlooking the distant horizon. They had spent many evenings here before, just sitting in silence. Mark sat down on the grass, leaning back on his hands. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his front paws, ears relaxed. The sky slowly turned from blue to orange to soft purple. "You know," Mark began softly, "I've always trusted you. From the first day we started training, I knew you were special. But what you did that day, I'll never forget it for the rest of my life." Rex lifted his head slightly at the sound of his partner's voice. "I was scared," Mark continued honestly. "I didn't think I'd make it. But I heard you, Rex. I heard your bark. And something inside me refused to give up. You pulled me back." Mark reached out his hand and gently rubbed Rex's head. The dog closed his eyes for a second, enjoying the familiar touch. "You're not just my partner," Mark whispered. "You're my family." The wind blew softly around them, rustling the grass. Rex leaned closer, pressing his head against Mark's shoulder for a moment. It was quiet, but in that silence, everything that needed to be said was understood. Over the following months, Mark fully recovered. He returned to light duty first, then full operations. But something had changed. Their bond was deeper now. Every mission, every walk, every silent glance between them carried a weight of trust that couldn't be broken. Whenever new soldiers joined the base, they heard the story of Rex, the German shepherd, who refused to give up on his partner. Many of them were inspired to join the K9 unit. Hoping to build a bond like the one between Mark and Rex, Rex became a symbol on the base. Not just of loyalty, but of hope. A reminder that sometimes courage doesn't come from words or medals, it comes from love. And Mark never forgot the lesson that day taught him. Life could change in a single moment, but real loyalty, real love, it stays. Years later, when the sun would set over that same hill, Mark and Rex would still walk there together, side by side. And even when words weren't spoken, their hearts spoke loud enough for both of them. Because this wasn't just a story about a soldier and his dog. It was a story about trust, about loyalty, about a miracle made possible not by luck, but by love. Rex never saw himself as a hero. He just did what his heart told him to do. And in doing so, he gave a man his life back. And from that day on, every time Mark looked at Rex, he didn't just see a dog. He saw the reason he was still breathing, still walking, still alive, together. They had faced darkness and returned to the light. Together, they had written a story that would live on at the base long after the dust had settled. Rex remained by his side, loyal, brave, and full of quiet strength every single day. And that, more than any medal or award, was the greatest gift of all.